Hello friends, welcome to JavaEE Servlet tutorial. In this video, we are going to look at Eclipse demo for RequestDispatcher. In this demo, we will use both forward as well as include method of the RequestDispatcher. So all this stuff we saw in the previous two videos. Now we will continue with our example. So we talked about this slide in the previous video. So this is the example we are going to create. Actually, there is one login.html. This is marked as one. This is one element we will create. Then login yes, that's a servlet. Second part, web part that we will create here in this demo. Then the number marked as 5, which is login response servlet. So login yes will perform a forward to login resp, and login resp will use the include method. So we will see both the method in this demo. Now let me open Eclipse Neon. Now we will open Eclipse Neon. So let's close the open to file. This is from our previous example HTTP session. So we'll close this. So our goal is to create login.html. We will do that now. So this is our login.html. Here you can see we are getting a username, input type is text, next password, static text, then input type is password, and this is a form. Action will be performed by the login servlet. So next we will create login servlet. So here I am creating the login servlet. This login is I copied from this action. We are just overriding do post. So in the do post to override, first we get the form field data. We're getting username and password from this HTML file. Both are input field. One is type is text and another input type is password. So by supplying this name, we are getting the form field data. So if you remember, in the previous video, we talked about this login servlet. The login servlet will actually perform the validation. Based on the validation output, it will forward the request to one more servlet, login response servlet. So before sending that response, it will modify this incoming request parameter. This servlet will set some attribute. So the attribute will tell whether the validation is pass or fail. So that's what we are going to do now. And if you see username, which is the one supplied by the user using the HTML form, we are checking that username is equal to some fixed value. Usually this will get queried from the database. Since this is just a demo, I am hard coding the username and password. So ultimately here we are checking. So ultimately here we are checking username is YouTube and password is coding examples. So if that is the case, we set the request attribute as pass. So the request attribute name here is authentication and we set the value as pass. So if this condition fails, we set authentication attribute as a fail. So the authentication attribute is set into the request object. Next, this login servlet is getting the request dispatcher for login resp. So this servlet not yet created, we will create that next. So we are getting the request dispatcher for that login response servlet. So the object is HTTP servlet request. We are making call to get request dispatcher. This will give the request dispatcher object. So the request dispatcher object is from javax.servlet package. So we are importing that. So after getting the request dispatcher for login resp servlet, which we will create soon, we are forwarding the request and response object received here for this login servlet. So the login servlet is forwarding the request and response to this login resp depend.forward request response. Once this forward happens, this login servlet washes its hand and dedicates everything to login resp. After this forward call, it is login resp's duty to process incoming request, which is actually forwarded by our login servlet. So it will make use of this request as well as make use of response and send the response to the client. So here the client is the user who browsed this login page and submitted it. So now you are seeing here how we are using the forward method of a request dispatcher. First we are getting request dispatcher by specifying the servlet. You can specify anything here. You can specify JSP, or you can even specify a complete HTTP address of web resource that resides on completely different server. Since it's a demo, we are just using the short notation name, and this login resp resource will be available in this Wildfly server itself. Alright, now we will create this. Remember, now the duty of this login resp is, so if you see here, the login servlet modified the request attribute, then it forwarded the request and response to the login resp. So it also validated the username and password, and login servlet, the login yes servlet finished the duty of validating the username and password, and then it modified the request attribute accordingly. That means it puts the outcome of the validation. Now we will create the new servlet. So since it's a delegation and the parent is overriding to post, here we are overriding to post. So now if you see here, the duty of this login servlet is to send the response to the client. So it gets the print writer as usual. Then here if you see, we are making use of get attribute. So this login servlet, before forwarding the request and response, it set the attribute authentication with value pass or fail based on the validation here. So now here we are using the request.get attribute and we read that authentication attribute, then we store the login result in a string. So next we form our output. If a login result is pass, we say login success. So this result directly goes to the browsing user. So even though this is a login.html, so the user is browsing to this page and from there they submitted the form. So the same browser session will receive this login success message. So even though the message, I mean the username and password are submitted to the login servlet, the response is given by the login resp, because login yes servlet forwarded the ownership to login resp. Now login resp is responsible to do further processing. Here if you see, this is the further processing on the request, then it is forming the output. So this is just for password authentication success case. So now if a password authentication fails, now we will create the else portion. So in the else portion we say login failed, you can try login again. But if we stop here, then user needs to go to the login page again, then they should initiate the login process again. So either we have to provide a link here, or user should navigate to that login page by typing the web address in the address bar. So this is where the include method comes into picture. Now what we will do after printing this message, so here we are talking about the login failure. So if login is success, we will send a response and that's all. So we don't need to do anything. But if login fails, then this login response will send the login HTML content to the web browser. So the web browser is already seeing this message, login failed, you can try login again. Now we will use the include method to include this login.html. So as already discussed in the slide, you can include any web resource, like you can include login.html, I mean you can include HTML, you can include JSP page, or you can even include one more servlet. So in case of dynamic content, let's take a servlet for example. All the output produced by that servlet, those output get include as part of the response object of this login response servlet. Here we are getting response.getWriter, right? So the output of the including servlet will go with this response. But here we are going to use the static content, that means the login HTML. Alright, now we will include the content of login.html as part of the output. So as usual, here we are getting the request dispatcher, and if you see, this time we are getting the request dispatcher for login.html. Previously this login servlet got the request dispatcher for login resp that we are writing now. Then it forwarded the request and response to this login resp. Here we are getting the get request dispatcher for login.html. It's a static HTML content, and we store request dispatcher reference in a dpat. Next, here instead of forwarding we are including. So we are including the login.html as part of this web response. Now when login fails, the content of out here will already produce login failed. Then since we include and we are sending the request and response, if you see here, from response only we are getting the writer object. So when we pass request and response, the include method will take care of, it will produce the same kind of stuff. It will use the print writer and then it will append the content. So the dispatcher object is for login.html, then we are asking to include that content. So using the response and print writer, the include method will include the content of this login.html. So user will see login failed and they see the included static content, and the included starting content is login.html. So they will ultimately see, after that failure message, they will see this same HTML content. Now we will deploy this and run. First we will start the Wildfly server. So Wildfly server is started. So we already have Servlet example, and if it is not published in your case, so all you have to do is right click on your Wildfly server, then click add and remove, then add this Servlet examples, click on the finish. You can see Wildfly server is started and synchronized, and the Servlet example also published. Now it is time to browse this login.html. First, let me type the valid username and password. So here you will see login success message. In the address bar, you are still seeing login S as the processing servlet, but internally this response is sent by login resp servlet, because login servlet already delegated the request processing to login a REST servlet. Now we will provide a wrong username and password. And if you see we are getting login failed, you can try login again. After that, the login servlet is printing the HTML form. So that HTML form is because of this dispatcher.include, because we are getting the dispatcher for login.html and we are including that as part of this response. So the response already printed login failed. You can try login again. Login failed. You can try login again. Then we are printing the content of the HTML. And let's say user is providing valid username and password after the first fail attempt. So they will get a login success. So the loop can continue like this, and if you want to log the login for a certain period, then you can include a HTTP session. You can make use of HTTP session. Then you can look at the number of attempt tried in the same session. So if it is more than 3, then you can log for some time, some 1 hour, or it's up to you. Alright, anyhow, here we are looking at the request dispatcher, and I hope you have an idea of how we include forward and include. So this video also helped you to understand what is the role of forward and what is the role of include. So include is to include the output content of other resources. Forward is transferring the ownership to some other web resource. I mean, so here transferring means it can do some partial processing. All right, that's all here in this video. Thank you for watching. Bye.